Oh, so you're a rocket scientist. That don't impress me much. What's up, motherfucks? I was reading some shit today and I had to address it. The thing that I'm talking about right now, of course, is the situation, if you want to call it that, between Mark Henry and Ryback, right? For those of you that don't know, apparently this happened a few weeks ago, I think. I'm not 100% sure. I read about it today somewhere, but, and then I did my own investigation. I listened to a few little podcasts, including Booker T and Jim Cornette, which nearly put me to sleep, but that's neither here nor there. The situation is as follows, right? Mark Henry is apparently pissed off at Ryback because in Ryback's little show, whatever podcast, whatever the fuck he has, right? Ryback said that wrestling is fake, that the world title and titles in general, I guess, are props, and that no one has ever won or lost the belt, right? Now, Mark Henry took exception to these statements, and we're going to talk about the statements themselves. We're going to talk about Ryback a little bit, and we're going to talk about Mark Henry and Booker T's response, right? So first off, let's look at the statements, right? The first statement, and arguably the most important one, is wrestling is fake. Now, a lot of people still to this day try to argue that wrestling isn't fake. The word fake, for some reason, really triggers wrestlers and a lot of smarks, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with the word fake. That's the problem. The problem is that we take certain words, right, and we attach a negative connotation to them, and then when the word is used correctly, people just attach it to that negative connotation, right? Fake is one of the perfect examples of this. A lot of things that are awesome are fake, motherfucks. Plays are fake. Movies are fake. Video games are fake. CGI shit is fake, right? A lot of experiences, magic is fake. A lot of experiences are premised upon tricking the viewer or the person experiencing the thing that they're experiencing something that they're not, right? That's the entire point of art, right? You paint a picture of Mona Lisa, and the goal is for someone to look at it and view it almost as if it was a real woman, right? Even though it's a piece of cloth with paint on it. You know what I'm saying? No one thinks of it like that way, right? The point of a good book or a good video game story or a good movie is to remove the viewer from reality and place them in this world in whatever capacity they can, right? So like if you're playing a game and you're like, come on, I gotta kill this motherfucker, right? Oh, I gotta shoot him in the head, right? That means the game is pretty good, right? Because it was able to put you in the shoes of the character. You are no longer experiencing it, right, as someone who's playing a game. You're almost kind of in the game in your own way, right? You're reacting with anger, real emotions are getting involved, right? Wrestling is no different, right? So, because it's fake, it doesn't mean that it loses any credibility, right? Who cares about that? You know what I'm saying? Like, you watch Liam Neeson, I've talked about this before, you watch Liam Neeson go and kill all these Albanians, and then the sheiks, and then the French people, like the sheiks in the boat or whatever the fuck they were, right, and their henchmen, right? And you're like, okay, that's pretty cool, right? Liam Neeson's awesome. Now, you know, in reality, of course, he can't do any of that shit, right? He's an old man. He's Liam Neeson. You know what I'm saying? He's not this like real tough guy, right? It's fake, but you buy into it, right? And I've always said that movies and wrestling should be the 2 points that are compared, not sports and wrestling, right? People, for some reason, have this weird desire to always compare wrestling to real sports. And I get why, because it's presented as a sport. But anyone who's not retarded that watches wrestling will realize once they grow up that it's obviously fake, that it's so over the top. Maybe not so much now, but definitely back in WWF, right? The Attitude Era, obviously it was fake, like some crazy shit's going on. Things that would never happen, you know? So there you have it, right? Though wrestling is fake, basically in other words, Ryback is right that wrestling is fake, but this does not devalue the medium of professional wrestling, right? Now, the way that people like Booker T and apparently Mark Henry reacted to it, I feel is problematic because it's the way that a lot of like hardcore smarks react to these things, right? Mark Henry's argument was more sound, so we'll talk about that second. But Booker T's argument pretty much was premised on 2 points, right? Point one, he makes his living through wrestling, and wrestling provides food and shelter for his family, therefore it's real to him, right? This is obviously like a horrible argument, and he was just trying to make the point that like, yo bro, like this is an important thing for me, so don't shit on it. That's the real argument he was making. But on its face, the argument of it makes money for me, therefore it's real, is obviously crazy, right? Because there's some Japanese people in Japan that one day sat down and decided to invent a thing called Pikachu, and make a franchise called Pokemon, right? And I'm sure a lot of them are filthy rich. Now, does that mean Pokemon is real? Of course not, right? It's obviously fake. They make their money on fake shit. Writers, playwrights, directors, actors. These people make their wrestlers. They make their living on fake things, right? Doesn't make it real. Now, the second part of this argument that that Ryback made, was that titles are props. Now, sure, titles are props in the same way that the jersey of a soccer player is a prop, or the same way that Tom Brady's recent Super Bowl MVP award is a prop, right? Like, it serves a purpose beyond the limits of the actual contest itself. And there is a contest in wrestling. It's not an athletic one, but there is a contest, right? So within the limits of the Super Bowl, right, at the end, a few men and maybe women get together at some point, sit down and discuss who the best player of this game was. They all agree, Tom Brady gets the award. At least that's how I think it happens. Who the fuck knows, right? So Tom Brady didn't earn this award traditionally. He didn't win it traditionally, right? He didn't directly compete with people to win it, right? There was no metrics as to how he won it, right? There's no way to say that this award was won because of this, and that. You can make that argument subjectively, right? You can say, out of all the players, Tom Brady scored the most points. He took the most hits. He's the oldest. He's the most popular, right? All these things might play a factor into it, right? But there is no metrics that you could look at beforehand to determine how and who will become a Super Bowl MVP, right? Wrestling is exactly the same thing. You can look at wrestlers and be like, all right, Mark Henry's stronger than Ricochet. Mark Henry's better than Ricochet. But Ricochet's going to become champion because, I don't know, we need a small guy. Who the fuck knows, right? There's many reasons why people become champions. But there is no list of rules that will make you champion, right? There is no, like, if you beat up this guy and score this many points or anything like that. Because wrestling's fake, right? So that's also true. Now, the third argument, which I just touched on a little bit, is that no one has ever won or lost titles, right? Now, obviously, this also is true in the traditional sense, right? No one has actually bested someone, defeated someone, outperformed someone to become champion, right? That's never happened. Except it kind of has in this context, right? The outperform contest. Like, the same way, for example, that Tom Brady won the Super Bowl MVP, he didn't directly defeat someone, right? He played a great game, but there's no argument that you can make that can be used for next Super Bowl, and then use that argument to determine the winner of the next Super Bowl MVP, right? But it also, at the same time, cannot be denied that Tom Brady's contributions to the game were substantial, right? That's why he won. It's not a random stroke of luck, right? It's the same thing in wrestling, motherfucks. It's the same exact thing, you know? People are like, oh, why is John Cena champion, not Matt Hardy? Very simple. John Cena is marketable, John Cena is handsome, John Cena is charismatic, and Matt Hardy is not any of those things, at least at the level of John Cena. I mean, he's great in his own right, don't get me wrong, I love Matt Hardy. But he's not as great as John Cena and those things. Or Randy Orton. That's why they're champions, and that's why Matt Hardy is in the mid-card. Same thing with MVP, same thing with all these guys, right? They don't have what it takes, pretty much is the answer, right? They're not good enough at their job to become champion, right? And this is a form of competition, right? It's a form of competition because this is how all jobs work, basically, right? Very few jobs have direct comparisons, you know, except for like sales maybe, right? Everything else is like, okay, like you did a good job, I like you. You know, you show drive, you show initiative, you're smart, whatever the case may be, but the actual metrics are very skewed, you know? It's really hard to pinpoint who really is the best at their job. So it's the same thing, right? The most meritorious fields are sports and sales probably. So there you have it, you know what I mean? That's what it is. Everything else is just kind of subjective. Wrestling falls into that everything else. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Now, while I can personally agree that all of Ryback's arguments make sense on their own in a vacuum, when taken together, right, they become annoying, right? And they become annoying, and that's what I think happened, is Mark Henry was annoyed at his nonsense, as was Booker T, right? Like, they all understand that he's right about 1, 2, and 3, the 3 arguments, but the reality is what the reality is, right? He presents it in a way that is meant to trivialize wrestling, right? He presents it in a way to say that, like, because, wrestling is fake, and because championships are props, and because no one ever won these championships or lost these championships. Therefore, wrestling ain't shit. That's the implication of what he's saying, right? And that is just not true. That is just preposterous, right? And that is worthy for people like Mark Henry to get angry at Ryback for, right? It makes perfect sense. And that's really the heart of what I'm trying to capture in this video. That just because the premises of this argument are true, right? The implicit conclusion, I think it's implicit, because I don't think Ryback said it ain't shit, right? But the implicit conclusion is not necessarily true. Because you can have a lot of things, especially in art and performance art, you can have a lot of things that are fake, right? But that still entertain you, right? Like every movie, basically. You know what I mean? It could still entertain you, it could still be fun, and more importantly, it still has value, right? And that's all there is to it. That's pretty much what Mark Henry was saying. I mean, along with a bunch of other shit that was directed directly to Ryback, but we're going to get to that in a second, motherfuckers. The most important takeaway here is to understand why Ryback would say this, right? I don't really see a reason. You know what I'm saying? According to what I know about Ryback, which I think is accurate, Ryback asked for his release and was granted his release after, like, what, 5-6 years of doing basically nothing in WWE, right? So as far as I'm concerned, I don't see why Ryback has any gripes with wrestling, or WWE for that matter, right? You know? So why would he say all this shit? The only explanation I can think of, right, is the sour grapes explanation. For those of you that don't know, Google Aesop, motherfucks, sour grapes. I forget what the actual fable is. I think it's like, what, the fox and the crow or something. But long story short, there's a bunch of grapes, a little bushel or whatever the fuck you call them, of grapes. I think it's a bunch of grapes, right? And the fox wants to get the grapes to eat them, but the fox cannot reach them because he is a fox, right? In swoops, I think it's a crow, but it could be some other kind of bird, right? The bird easily picks the bunch of grapes, takes it up to a tree, right? And starts eating it, right? These grapes do not belong to the fox, but the fox is entitled to the grapes. Eventually, the story ends, motherfucks, with the fox saying, I don't want the grapes. They're probably sour anyways, motherfucks, right? That's where the expression sour grapes comes from, right? The premise was this. The fox could not get the grapes. The fox lacked the abilities that the bird had to get the grapes. So instead of accepting this, right, the fox, being a little bitch, decided to try to ruin it, essentially. Try to ruin it for the bird that was going to eat the grapes, saying, oh, they're probably sour anyways, right? In other words, I couldn't get them, so they ain't shit, right? That's what seems like is happening here with Ryback, right? Sour fucking grapes. You know, he never had any success, really, in WWE. As a matter of fact, you could argue that he's one of the biggest flops ever, you know? And as a result, it seems like he's butthurt, right? He didn't achieve his dreams, so he wants to now drain and diminish the dreams of other people. Now, it is what it is. That's like a mild infraction. We're going to continue our lives. No one's going to hate Ryback forever, right? But it is interesting to note, right? Because Ryback really is a smark, from what I understand, right? A lot of people really like Ryback, especially after the whole CM Punk situation, right? People like Ryback for the same reasons they like Goldberg, right? That they perceive him as someone that's like really strong and powerful, and that he has presence and all these other things, right? For example, the Smart Busters always talk about how Ryback is great, right? Now, I personally agree to an extent. Like, Ryback is not a bad wrestler overall, right? Like, Ryback, for example, if you were to compare him to, I don't know, Ezekiel Jackson, right? He's better than Ezekiel Jackson, obviously, right? He's more charismatic. He's more humorous, right? He has a better physique. But that's about it, right? Like, there's nothing that really separates him from Ezekiel Jackson in terms of, like, a character or, you know, in-ring work or anything like that, right? Like, the Ryback character is a shitty character. First of all, it's a character that anyone can play because it just involves him moving his arm and saying, feed me more, right? And it's feeding time, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really require any skills, right? And the skills that it does require, like, for example, in-ring work, since it's just such a basic gimmick, he lacks them. Let's be real, you know? Like, I would even say that Ezekiel Jackson is better in the ring than Ryback, and here's why, right? I can only remember Ezekiel Jackson having two moves. The clothesline that he does, and the Book of Ezekiel. Likewise, I can only remember Ryback having 2, maybe 3 moves. The Spine Buster, which wasn't anything special. The Meat Hook Clothesline, which is just a clothesline. And then the Shell Shock, which is like probably the worst finisher in the history of finishers. I mean, let's be real. Let's call it what it is. It's a shit finisher. It's basically a Samoan drop where he walks around and then he drops the guy and it's supposed to be a finisher, right? And more importantly, Ryback oftentimes couldn't really pick up the guy. I remember clearly in my head several botches of the Show Shocked, right? Where you couldn't do the stomps, or you couldn't lift him up the correct way, and so you had to do this like weird way that he picked him up. Right? There was a lot of things that Ryback did that just weren't that good, right? Now with that in mind, right? With that in mind, we have to ask ourselves, could this be why Ryback believes himself to be like screwed over, to be held back? And could this then be the motivation behind this nonsense about how wrestling ain't shit, right? You see what I'm saying, motherfucks? He never really reached anything. He feels entitled like the fox in our parable, right? And he really didn't get it done. I mean, let's call it like it is. And fundamentally, we all know why he didn't get it done. Because he wasn't that good. You know, people pretending that he needed a push, or he got plenty of pushes. You know what I'm saying? He got several pushes. He's, I believe, the only wrestler ever to get another push without any changes to his character. Just a straight up push, like a mega push, right? So he gets the first mega push when he's introduced as Ryback. Then he has that whole Ryback thing, you know? And then before you know it, a few months later, he's just Ryback again, by himself, just dominating people. Like nothing ever happened. Like the last 4 years, this career didn't happen. He just gets another push. Changes absolutely nothing, works on nothing, doesn't improve one bit, gets a push. I really cannot think of anyone where that's happened, right? The only ones are people that have been consistently in the main event, obviously. Like Cena, Orton, Undertaker, who don't need to do any of this shit because they're awesome, right? So what I'm getting at is this, motherfucks. Mark Henry is right. Mark Henry's argument basically was, I am a champion in multiple sports, and I consider one of those sports to be wrestling. As a result, Ryback, right? I believe that it is a real accomplishment, right? Because that's the real metric here. Is it an accomplishment? Of course it is. Ryback, on the other hand, according to Mark Henry, has never won a championship in anything other than wrestling. In other words, he doesn't know what it's like to be a champion in something, to then compare it to what he calls a prop, right? He doesn't know. He doesn't know the feeling of being a champion. This is all theory to him, motherfucks. So Mark Henry's point was very sound, I thought, right? It's like, dude, you don't know. Like, I know, you don't know. You know? You can live in your fantasy land where it's a prop, but it means something around these parts. And that's the real critical point here, right? Ryback, when saying wrestling ain't shit, basically what he was saying is it doesn't mean anything, right? Like being champion, right, in wrestling doesn't mean anything because it's not a real sport. And that's ridiculous. Of course it means something. Of course it means something. Look at my Tom Brady example, motherfucks. Of course it means something, right? Now, a lot of people, for example, again, talking about the Smart Busters, they, at some point, mentioned in one of their videos, right, that like the Shield, all three champions of the Shield were the lowest drawing champion, right? Like, so like first, Roman Reigns was the lowest drawing champion, and then he was superseded by Rollins, who became an even worse draw, and by Ambrose, who became the worst of all three of them, right? Now, this is another accurate way to measure the worth of a wrestler. So shout out to the Smart Busters, right? It's true, you know? Think about that. That's the only real metric that matters, honestly, right? Is how much money can you bring into the company, right? That's why we have people like Conor McGregor, and people are like, why does he keep getting title shots? Why does he have to, like, you know, like fight once a year and he gets to be on pay-per-view? Because he draws money. That's all that matters. Nobody gives a fuck about like someone's work ethic or grit unless that translates to drawing money. You know what I'm saying? So that's the real measure of a wrestler, is how much money can you draw, right? Doesn't matter to me or to anybody else how legit of a wrestler you are. That doesn't even matter in real sports. You know? As I said, people talk about Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor getting more opportunities than they deserve. And they're like, how could this be? They didn't win, right? Yeah, because that's not how the world works, motherfucks. The world doesn't work on actual merit. The world works on, I can bring you money, so therefore I deserve more of your attention. That's how the world works, and that's how sports works too. Don't get it twisted, motherfucks. It's the same exact thing in sports. Like, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't give a flying fuck about the Super Bowl unless Tom Brady wasn't playing in it, right? Because I am much more interested in seeing whether Tom Brady can win his 7th ring than I am in seeing who's gonna get the next Super Bowl, Tampa Bay or fucking Kansas City. I couldn't give a fuck about either one, you know what I'm saying? I only watched because of Tom Brady, and I believe there was a lot of people that only watched to see either Tom Brady play or to see Tom Brady and his goal in getting a 7th ring, right? So there is a meta attraction to this game that goes beyond the actual football game. Nobody cares about that. I mean, obviously people do, but I don't give a fuck, right? So Tom Brady has value beyond the fact that he is good at his job, right? Look at Titus O'Neil. Titus O'Neil hasn't had a match on TV in years, right? And certainly hasn't had a memorable moment in his entire career. But he is employed, and he's been employed for like 10 years at least, right? Why? Because he brings something else to the table. He brings incredibly good PR. He's very charming, right? He's a very good representative of the WWE brand, right? At least not in the ring, but outside of the ring, he's great at his job, right? And therefore, they keep him around because they see value in him. Value isn't just who can go out there and draw fans. Value is, can you give me good PR? Can you cross over to other media? You know what I'm saying? It's all these other elements that go into sports and, of course, entertainment, right? So to say that there's no actual value in being champion is preposterous. Because fundamentally speaking, if you're WWE champion, you, for example, can leave WWE and maybe Dana White will give you a shot. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, he's not going to give a shot to Grand Metalik. You know what I'm saying? Grand Metalik is not going to have a CM Punk or Brock Lesnar level entrance into the UFC, right? CM Punk and Lesnar get that because they're WWE champions, right? Because Dana White can book them as champions. He can say, this guy was the best guy in WWE. Let's see if he can do anything here in UFC, right? Now, nobody really cares if Grand Metalik can go and beat some like featherweight, right? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. Who the fuck cares? You know, nobody would tune in. That's the draw of being champion. Because you are the figure. You are the face of the company or one of the faces of the company. And this is something that Ryback never achieved and is now criticizing. And Mark Henry put him in his place quickly. And now, before I go, motherfucks, I have to address this other point that I heard in the Booker T podcast, right? Booker T took a slight jab, not really a jab, but he dug a little bit at Mark Henry and also apparently JBL, right? He said that Mark Henry and JBL both were supportive of Ronda Rousey's like similar rant about wrestling not being real, and they said it was a great thing, right? And Booker T demands that Mark Henry and I guess JBL, I don't know if JBL said anything about Ryback, but he demands that Mark Henry be consistent, right? Because his argument was, why is it okay for Ronda Rousey to say it and not Ryback, right? Now, while I love Booker T and while I appreciate his point of view in the sense that he's trying to make everything fair, I agree with that. It is different though, right? Ronda Rousey was being harassed by fans by the same neckbeards, you know, and her counter argument was, yo, what I do is real fighting, right? Number one. And two, this shit's fake. So like, don't fucking come at me with this like I'm not good at it. You know what I'm saying? Because they were criticizing her performance. They were saying, oh, she's shit. She shouldn't be here, right? She's like, it's fake. What the fuck are you talking about? You know? Anyone can be here was the point. Also, it was kind of like a work. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like a work. She was kind of turning heel slowly, right, to feud with Becky Lynch. And that was the point. The point was like, yo, like, I don't give a fuck. I'm Ronda Rousey. You know what I'm saying? It's like something an arrogant heel would say. Whereas Ryback, aside from my very eloquent sour grapes explanation, he has no real reason to be upset, right? They gave him a job for 5-6 years that he quit on his own. They gave him countless opportunities that he squandered. So I don't really see what anger he has to have with WWE. You know what I mean? There you go, motherfuckers. That's what I gotta say about that. And with that being said, I'll talk to you motherfuckers later up in this